Hi and welcome to another episode of the Aga Wilson Show. Today I have with me a very interesting guest. His name is Alexander Pohl and he is a former bankman. I don't know how you really say that, but we kind of have a little bit in common with our background and experience, and you've been working a lot on green projects, and I think I'm going to actually let you introduce yourself and your background.
Thanks, Aga.
And welcome.
Indeed, indeed. So thanks for inviting me onto your show. I'm equally interested in the conversation we're going to have. My background is I am a banker, but it's probably equally important to know that I'm born in Germany. I grew up in the US. I then came back to Europe, went to university in Scotland, and then I worked as a graduate, an accountant, and a consultant for a company called KPMG, which is a big auditing firm and consulting firm. And then I ended up as a banker for 15 years at HSBC, doing all different types of things. So I've got quite a broad background from countries and from my education. And yeah, it's led me to a very interesting place, which is why we're talking today.
Yes, exactly. So, so I know you've been involved in a lot of, green projects and trying to really help our planet and nature. And then I know that you kind of saw a lot of things from the inside, just like we all do when we work in these institutions. So what made you see, like what was it that triggered, that something was wrong? Like what did you see from the inside, and what made you think that, maybe this is not totally 100% what you thought it would be?
The environmental movement is a really passionate one. And like many people, when I was growing up, I was a kid, I liked nature, I liked trees, take care of, birds that fall out of their nests. And generally, I think most people are inherently nature focused when they're a young person and care about horses or whatnot. But then when I was growing up, my dad, who was a Second World War veteran, he was thrown into the war at the very end. He was always saying, like many people's parents do, you need to get a good education, you need to be successful, you need to make lots of money and have a big career. So I kind of built that through. So I kind of had this, my heart was in nature and the planet and people and kindness, but in the back of my mind was this society saying you must be the best, you must be the most successful, you must have things and materialism. So when I ended up going into the industry, I studied engineering and I tried to become an engineer to build things that would fix the planet. But when I graduated, they didn't want new graduates in the engineering companies. So I had to go to KPMG. And when I started there, it was amazing. A graduate at KPMG, there's a lot of entertainment, a lot of drinking, a lot of being together with other people. It was right after September the 11th, so I was very lucky to have a job because the industry was quite shaken by that event. And then I found a place where people were making money from saving the planet. And I was like, what? I can marry what my father said with, what society wants me to do with saving the planet? Clearly, that must be a place for me to go. So I went into it. And at the time, I didn't realize what I was doing. I was just like, wow, I'm saving the planet. But we were already dealing with big companies like BP, Shell. I was working with financial companies, with industrial companies, and we were doing what's called due diligence, which is you look at the company, you see what problems it has, and you report back on them. And we were trying to make environments money. Oh yeah, you polluted 10,000 square kilometers of Siberian tundra. Well, that's worth $10 million, and then they would just go, okay, $10 million, destroy the tundra in Siberia. Fine. And then suddenly we were working with the United Nations. So that was the first time I came across the United Nations, and I was like, wow. I'm 21 years old and I'm working with the United Nations. I've made it. And we were doing something called the Clean Development Mechanism, which was all about carbon emissions and CO2. And we worked with a lot of companies in India and China. And we were having debates because we audited them. So they were getting money for saving carbon. So carbon was monetized, but we were debating about whether they really did. It was called additionality. Did they actually save this, or were they going to save it anyway? And it turns out that they were basically committing fraud. And we were kind of justifying helping them commit fraud. So they got paid, I think in the end, Oxfam did a report, $100 billion back in 2000 and maybe 4 or 5. So 100 billion back then is, you know, we're talking about serious money.
Yeah.
And that was the United Nations that facilitated it all. So looking back on it, I was like, oh, okay, that's maybe not so good. And then I kept following it through, and then I went to, I left KPMG after a few years, and I went to the bank, to HSBC, to do insurance. And again, we were doing things like natural catastrophe risk. And we were working with Bermuda, and they have these things called natural catastrophe bonds. And basically, they're gambling. It's like, you know, like going to Vegas. Is there going to be a hurricane? Yes or no? How many? How many houses will get destroyed? It was a financial thing. And then they would basically take lots of people's investors' money and then say, okay, are you for the hurricane or against the hurricane? So already, again, climate and the planet was all being turned into money. And then we did a lot of work around pollution and contamination. And I realized that I was working with companies who were basically trying to cheat the system. Oh yeah, don't worry, we'll just leave the pollution in the ground. It'll never hurt. Oh yeah, and if it does, I can sell you some insurance. So I used to sell insurance in case people got asbestosis. At the time, I thought it was good, because if you get sick, you want to get compensation. You know,
exactly.
and you know, in this modern day, we're talking a lot about people getting sick from medicines and other things, and the first thing they say is, "Oh, we'll just give you some money," you know. And most people are like, "Oh, thank you. You know, you did this operation, and you know, I can no longer have children." "Oh, but you gave me $1 million." I'm like, "But you can no longer have children. You know, no amount of money is going to fix that."
Yeah.
So again, seeing these things being turned into money, and then finally I went to the bank, and that's when I saw the big things. You know, we were financing big wind farms and lots of infrastructure that over the years I went, what is going on? This is not right. And, you know, there was fat bankers who, you know, to be perfectly honest, the stories about bankers and prostitutes and bankers and drug use and bankers and nepotism and egoistical people and narcissism, many of them are true. These types of people go to the money. They follow the money because that's part of their fix and their drug. And so when I wasn't happy to become that, and I started pushing back, I started getting lots of problems and friction. And then had a few fights. I got basically, I guess you'd say, demonized. You know, some of my bosses tried to, you know, like, make my life so miserable that I would quit, because they don't want to pay you out anymore. They want you to quit.
Yeah,
you know, so actually,
exactly.
Companies want you to give up. But then in the end, I sort of carried on, and I had decided to leave, and then they basically made me redundant, and then I got out. And then once you're out, you can be honest. It's a little bit, it feels a little bit weird to say that, but when you're working for a big company, it's very difficult to be honest because they try to fire you. So you're like, okay, if I want to keep my job, I need to be untrue to myself. But if I quit my job, then, well, the company doesn't change. I don't have any money anymore, and society and my debts or mortgage and things. So it was a little bit of a funny time. But I was very lucky that the stars aligned for me, that I could get out and be free. I didn't have a big mortgage and things like that, thanks to, you know, my dad helping out and my parents helping me out a little bit in life, which I was very fortunate to have had a father who was obsessively a hard worker. And also, I saved a bit of money over time. So when I left the bank, I could move to Sweden, debt-free, and then I thought I could run away, and I became an accidental activist, which is how I ended up here.
Yes, and you know, so I did read couple of articles about you yesterday, and just to find out, what you've been doing here. And I know that you've been talking a lot about the wind turbines and what those are and how they are actually not helping as much as people think. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about that.
Definitely.
And what is actually going on? How effective are they?
Well, this is the thing, is I didn't want to end up fighting, like, I joke sometimes Don Quixote, but I mean, that would be an ego thing to compare myself to Don Quixote. But basically, I wanted to move to the forest and disappear, and then, well, just have to deal with the world when the world comes. But the world came after 9 months of living in the forests. And when I looked into the wind power issue in Sweden, I had already known from the bank that money is driving most of this industrial infrastructure. Even if it's called green, it's just about money and companies. But then when I looked into it, I realized there's a lot more to it. And my wind farms, I've got General Electric, Google, Infravia, Jämtkraft, Persson Invest, and various banks, HSBC, my own bank. I've got Nordex, I've got Vestas, I've got Siemens, I've got all these, the biggest players in the wind turbine industry and the wind power sector on my doorstep. I didn't know they were there when I moved there. I didn't move there. I probably wouldn't have moved there if I knew that they were there. But of all the people in the world who can understand it, I'm one of a few. There are others, but most of them work for banks and are still part of the bad side of things. And when I looked into it, I went, this is really strange. How can this be possible? It's not windy, but they're building, they had 400. I think there's going to be another, they want to build another 200 or 300. Why would you build 600-700 wind turbines where it's not windy? And that's when I started to uncover the fact that there's so much more to this green agenda than pretending to save the planet. I found corruption at the local municipality level, local people, sympathizers, I call them, working with the enemy. And then I discovered that there were things happening at the Landstyrelsen, which are the ones who give the permits, that was completely irregular and conflicting. Then the courts, then the politicians, then the government, then there's something called Riksintresse för Vindkraft. And everywhere I looked, I found corruption. In Sweden, where Transparency International and Ulrich, who is the representative TI in Sweden, will probably punch me for saying, they rate Sweden as the 3rd least corrupt country in the world, year on year. And I would argue that Sweden is the 3rd most corrupt country in the world because they have perfected corruption to the point that it's a normal fabric of society.
It's hidden.
It's hidden. Well, no, it's integrated. It's endemic. It's not we don't have a corruption pandemic in Sweden. We have endemic corruption in Sweden. And then I realized that I had nothing to lose. And so for the last 2.5 years, I have just been doing everything that I can. And my network is still great. So, I've done some pretty out of the ordinary things in the hopes that we can wake people up to the fact that wind turbines, which are supposed to save them, are actually going to do exactly the opposite.
But how are they damaging to people?
So,
like, how do they work? Because I did see something in the article yesterday, but I didn't really realize, or understand the depth of it.
And this is one of the tricks that the industry and the people behind it use, is it's complicated. And to break it down into simple terms, when you flick the switch, you want the light to go on. But the light will only go on if there's a perfect balance between things making electricity and things using electricity. So electricity, a perfect system, you know exactly how much people are going to use, so you can make exactly enough. Wind turbines and solar panels, you never know how much electricity they're going to make, because you might have a good idea about how much approximately wind will be blowing or whether it's going to be a sunny or a cloudy day, but you can't make the wind blow. So there's unpredictability on making electricity from wind. And that volatility creates instability, and it basically causes the electrical system to become unstable. So that's a technical thing. So wind power is bad because it makes our electricity system unpredictable, more expensive, and if people haven't looked at their electricity bill, they can say it's Ukraine and gas prices. Yes, of course, that's also part of it. But before Ukraine was here, we already had electricity prices going up because they were building electrical cables throughout Sweden. These wind farms get all types of benefits. So it's bad from the fact that it makes our electricity system really fragile, and we could have blackouts, and we've been very close to having blackouts a number of times due to wind in particular. It makes our electricity and so forth consumption much more expensive, but then it has all types of sort of environmental and human impacts as well. So it's supposed to be clean. It's called clean. Anyone who's been to a wind farm knows that wind farms are dirty places. I mean, they are filthy, from the machines to the destruction to the fact these wind turbines are full of grease. And so it's a chemical industrial place. It's not clean. On top of that, it's noisy. So it's not peaceful, it's not quiet, it's noisy, it disrupts people's sleep. Then, you know, we are trying to save nature, but wind farms destroy vast amounts of nature, where the wind farm is, where all the power cables go, all of the mines that are required to build these wind farms, and the products themselves. And then we looked at how many jobs does it create versus how many it destroys. And we found out that it's a massive job destruction sort of industry. Yeah, you have a couple of guys from Lithuania or Poland who come into Sweden for a few months to build these things. Yeah, okay, they feed their families and stuff like that. But they need to keep building wind farms. So they're like in a Ponzi scheme. But it destroys tons of businesses, you know, tons of villages, businesses. For every job created, I would love to figure out if there's a statistic. I would argue that there are probably 5 to 10 jobs destroyed. And then the villages are getting destroyed. Who wants to live next to a wind farm? You know, you can say what you like. Wind farms are not nice to live next to. And I forget what her name is, the politician who was just talking about wind farms, and she said, no, I wouldn't live next to one. I'm like, well, if it's not good enough for you, why is it good enough for others?
And who's paying for this?
And who's paying for it, exactly. And then finally, you know, it destroys nature, birds, the vibrations. It's really insane when you think about the area that is negatively influenced by a wind farm. Some people are like, oh yeah, but here's the boundary. I'm like, no, a wind farm has influence up to 100 kilometers away. So if you wanted to have a program, as they do under Agenda 2030, of moving people out of the countryside into the cities, wind farms turn out to be a really useful tool to move people out of the rural areas into cities. So build them next to as many villages as you can, as many nice places, Sami reindeer herding lands. You know, it's also a great tool for samicide, I call it. You know, the intentional rotting out of the Sami culture, which has been going on for hundreds of years. But wind farms are great because all the people in Stockholm are saying, of course, oh, who cares about those Sami people? Put up wind turbines. Yeah, and then last but not least, people don't realize that wind farms have become like an industrial Ponzi scheme. You build a wind turbine to make green electricity for a green iron ore mine, to make more electricity and green iron for green steel, which you then use to make towers for wind turbines. Or you use it to make pointless buildings in Stockholm. You know, and so we have this industrial Ponzi scheme, which is like a cancer. It just keeps building and building. And then people say, oh, don't worry, we'll just make some more wind turbines. I'm like, it's like a heroin addict. Oh yeah, you know, just a little more, you know, just a little more. Oh, wait. Don't worry, I'm a heroin addict, but now they invented methadone. Ha, you know, as long as I'm taking methadone, I'm fine. Yeah, so it's a really, it was really disturbing for me because you watch the politicians and I'd mentioned this to someone else. I was in a seminar at the Stockholm School of Economics, and I spoke to Anders Grunwald, who is like a super important green politician, the Secretary of State for the Environment, who works for Annika Strandhäll. And I said to him, you know, what's going to save us, nature or machines? And he said, machines. And I just thought that was the weirdest response, because it was like, you know, does life not matter anymore? And then I went from being a banker and an engineer to suddenly having this more ethereal, spiritual, you know, what am I doing? I'm not just against wind farms. I realized that wind farms seem to be part of almost like an anti-life agenda. And so now I'm a defender of life, which is kind of a weird place to be honest.
Yeah, but I think many of us are waking up now to that. And I don't know, but for me, when I was in New York, I felt for 2 years, even before I actually moved, that, you know, it's time for me to really reconnect with nature. And I had this like really strong feeling, and I needed to realize that. So I think for you know, for a lot of people right now, it's coming in, because we just see how many people have started moving out from the cities, you know, due to the pandemic and other things, and the prices of houses went up, and it's been kind of crazy. But then I wanted to ask you, like, do you have a better solution? What's the best solution for electricity today, according to you?
Well, this is where it gets complicated, because that's always a great, I'm not going to say it was a gaslighting question, but, you know, to undermine this, this discussion, people say, but we need electricity. And from my perspective, I'm like, we need to take a step back, and we need to reassess the whole system. Because in certain respects, what do you need electricity for? You almost need to go back. I think when I was growing up, you know, we learned to do budgets at school. You know, yeah, you get so much comes in and so much comes out. And actually, if you realize that electricity, all electricity is in a way toxic. You know, you cannot make electricity in most respects without some type of harm. So actually, to have electricity is something super special. I mean, you know, it's enabled us to do things that we could never have imagined before. But then we went too far. So it's all about how do we go back to the appropriate amount of electricity for the right things. I was having a conversation with someone the other day. iPhone, I think they're about to get rid of the cable and go to wireless charging. Wireless charging, which means they use like microwave things to transfer electricity rather than cable. That's 50% less efficient than putting a cable in. So suddenly, Apple is making the energy use of an iPhone twice what it is today. It's pointless, you know, we'll just plug it in. You save 50% of the electricity. It's not rocket science. So we need to go back to figuring out what actually we need versus what we want, because over the last 100 years, we've all been reprogrammed. So we used to be, all of us used to be super efficient. We used to be able to use everything. We were all skinny because we did lots of physical exercise. We were all super smart. We were all Renaissance people. We could solve problems. We could make food from the forest. We could, you know, we probably were all gifted doctors and healers and things like that. But then we were moronified, as I've been told. We've all been turned into morons. You know, a friend of mine from the States says we're only 4% our potential. So, you know, that's pretty.
Yeah, you know what's funny? I actually, when you say this about, you know, how much do we really need, and you know, for us just being so used to like having the comfort, you know, that everything is served for us. But when I lived in Nepal for you know, working with humanitarian issues, and there, you know, you don't have electricity all the time, and it's incredible because it's such a chaos there that when I got there, I was just like, how am I going to like live here and survive this? You know, just getting simple things, basic things, you know, that you're so used to just being able to get in a store was not happening anymore. And the funniest thing is, you had electricity certain times in a day, and you could actually download an app to see like exactly when the electricity will come on in your area. And I even remember like when me and my girlfriends, you know, we were going to some party or something, and we had to like all plan, oh, we have to be back at this time because we all need to use like the hairdryer, you know, within these 2 hours. So, but somehow you just like learn to adapt and you kind of just solve it. And you knew that you couldn't use like a computer or you know, like stronger machines during the time when it was off. Then they had generators, and you could just maybe charge your phone. But you kind of, I mean, it's possible, and I think we're very spoiled, you know, with like how we're using this electricity and everything that we just get served, because there's, you know, many more of us who live in developing countries who are actually used to, you know, completely other circumstances, and they somehow live and they're happy, and you know, it's mind-boggling to like go there and see how people are just happier, you know, in many ways.
And that's the thing is, and just watching you tell the story, you told that story with a smile on your face. It was a real experience that, you know, made a real impact on you. And I think that so many people have too much electricity. I'm not saying, I think the people in Nepal could maybe use a little bit more electricity or a bit more reliable electricity. Yeah. But we don't need excess electricity, because there's the definition of a poison is really funny, actually. I was like, oh, what's a poison? Oh, yeah, it's this. No, a poison is supposedly anything that is more than you need. And I thought that was a really good definition of what a poison is, because it means that anything can be a poison, you know, chocolate, you know, too much stress or whatnot.
Too much of anything.
Too much of anything is not a good thing. But this also sort of kicked me into this mindset of humans are infinitely good at adapting to some things, right? Natural things. We're not so good at adapting to synthetic things, and actually our societies, you know, we're being exposed to more and more plastics and, you know, synthetic chemicals and so forth. Some of it is even without choice. You know, I was also trying to understand how does it all fit together, because the United Nations is kind of something that I want to talk about in a moment, is, you know, we've got all these initiatives that are supposed to make the world a better place, you know, technology, chemicals, convenience, but we've never been sicker, never been more stressed, we've never been poorer, you know, and let's not talk about, you know, Africans who live on $1 a day, because they don't choose to live on $1 a day.
No, but that in itself like makes me angry, because how is it possible that we haven't been able to solve world hunger in all of these years, and there's like 1% of the population who owns like such incredible amounts of money that even if they would share like a small fraction of that, we would be able to save that. And you know, all of these people are what do you call them? They're saying that they're doing good in the world, and they're investing in like all of these projects. Philanthropists. And you know, and they're not, because like what are they doing? They're trying to, all these projects are for nothing. It's been like years and years and years, and nothing has been solved. I am 100% sure that if we really wanted to, we could end world hunger within a year, you know, and like really help people. We're not doing that. That's why like I lost hope and belief in that we're actually sitting here and doing the right things, you know.
And that's where the complexity happens, is because those philanthropists have only been giving money with an agenda. Not all of them. You know, we had this conversation earlier. There are still plenty of good people out there, but there are many people who have been using money and philanthropy and civil society organizations and NGOs to drive a global agenda, an agenda of influence. And
which many are not aware of either. You know, people work there, they think they're doing a good thing.
No, of course not, because why would you believe that this NGO that's talking about, I don't know, like we were talking about female genital mutilation, you know, one of the most horrific things I can think of, that actually an NGO that's dealing with that topic actually could have an ulterior motive as well. Yeah. And then you're like, whoa, that's pretty complicated and deep. Yeah. But over the last, well, actually probably only the last 6 months, I've really rapidly come to the conclusion that the system is designed to do what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to descend us into chaos. It's supposed to make us, you know, not believe anything anymore. It's designed to lose faith in everything. They're doing a pretty good job, right? You lost faith in you know, your work in the United Nations. I kind of lost faith in the fact that you know, we as individuals can make a difference. Yeah. But then I sort of in the last 2 months or 3 months have woken up to the fact that actually every single person can make a difference. Yes. Even if you live in a trailer park in West Liberty, Iowa, which is where I grew up, and there were trailer parks there, and there were very poor people who were just struggling to get by, they can make a difference, and a positive difference. I'm not saying, you know, there's a rumor that, you know, the next stage of what's going on in the world is that they want us to bring down our governments. They want everyone to get really angry that we have been betrayed, and there will be lots of lies, maybe from Hunter Biden's laptop and his Pornhub channel, you know, to what's going on with, I don't know, other people around the world, that they're doing bad things, to make us angry. And then they say, well, they want us to bring down our governments and to basically go to civil war with each other. So these elites who are designing the system and in control don't have to do anything themselves. And I'm really hopeful that people will wake up and see that they can change things for the better without having to go to war. Yeah. You know, and because if we kill each other, then the bad guys win. And
exactly.
We don't want that. We want, actually, I want the bad guys to reform, if that's possible. Yeah. So, do you maybe want to? Should we maybe talk a little bit about the UN?
Yeah. Let's talk about the UN.
So, what did the UN mean to you before you went to work there?
I mean, when I remember at university, I had this Stockholm University. I had this amazing woman who was working on, you know, the humanitarian law and the UN, and it was a course I took. And when I read about the UN, I just thought, oh my God, like this is where I want to work. This is like the most prestigious organization in the world that's actually making a change, you know, and saving so many lives and doing all of this amazing stuff. So there was like no other option for me. I was just going to work at the UN. That was it, you know. And I was so determined that I remember like my classmates, no one believed me, but I believed that I was going to end up there. So one day I did, and I actually was like almost suffering from opportunity, because instead of getting like one internship there, I got 3 to choose between, which was like very hard for me at the time. And I just remember the first day I was standing in front of the UN building in New York. It was out of control. Like I couldn't believe it was true, and it was such a like huge, you know, feeling of just, wow, you know, I'm here and I'm gonna like be doing this work, you know, I'm saving the world, and I was so happy. And
what was it like after? How long were you there?
I was there for 3 years.
3 years. So when did it start to go wrong for you?
Well, I think, well, so I think, you know, it was a very long process even after I left. But there was so many red flags for me, you know, at the time, because I entered into the system, and it was everything the opposite of what I thought it would be. You know, the bureaucracy, the, you know, actual action on the ground, you know, the impact, you know, that I saw every day. I was very shocked, you know, or just over like what I was seeing. I had, because I was working with 21, I was helping coordinate the work of 21 UN agencies. So I collaborated with a lot of people from a lot of different agencies, and I had a lot of friends within the UN. And it was so funny, because all the people like on the lower levels, like myself, that came in, we were so passionate. We like came in with the heart in the right place. We wanted to make a difference. And so many of them, you know, got disappointed, you know, and the good people I always saw left the UN because they couldn't deal with you know, like the difficulties. And I don't think I've met anyone that hasn't had like a psycho boss at the UN. Like it was probably like 90% of people. And of course, like there's good people in there. There's a lot of, I was very inspired by so many people I met too. But on the higher levels, it was really difficult. And I just saw, you know, how instead of, you know, these young people that came in like with amazing ideas and, you know, and like a fresh breath of air, you know, being very inventive, were like pushed down, you know, immediately, because, you know, they weren't supposed to stick out. And I remember just, you know, there were people on high positions there that were ruthless. And they like, I saw them like walking over dead bodies to get where they wanted to get, which was to the top. And it was just, yeah, I just, and it was such a toxic environment.
Power
like
corrupts.
Yeah, and I didn't feel good there, you know. It was very tough to work in that environment. And then, you know, I had support from like friends in there and people that had, you know, that were good and were doing good things and thought they were there for the right reasons, you know. that you know, the UN was actually doing something. But it took me a long time to, like, you know, put everything into place, because, you know, still I was so determined. I really wanted to, like, continue being there, because I thought, you know, well, you know, maybe then when we climb up, the good people, you know, will make a difference. But it's very difficult, you know, and you see how the processes are handled, you know, who gets in, you know, you have to know someone. Like, it's all like people think, you know, oh yeah, you apply and it's like a fair process. But it wasn't, you know, nothing was fair there. And you know, for me, like, the one thing that always stood out to me, that like made me come back to my core beliefs and like what I believe in, is, okay, we're saving the world here. We're trying to create world peace. This is the organization that's creating world peace. How come we cannot even have peace in our own offices? We're never going to be able to create world peace out there if we can't have peace here. And there was never peace. It was always conflict, you know, big egos. We were sitting in meetings and they basically had, I mean, there were 2-hour conversations sometimes about like stupid stuff that I couldn't believe was actually going on. Like, you know, like how we should write this document and what we should use for font. Like, you know, those kind of things.
Would it have been too dissimilar to a Föreningsmöte here in Sweden? I do find that the Swedish system is very similar, where they want to have a möte for everything, like a meeting, and Swedish people seem to like bureaucracy. It's almost as if the UN was modeled on Swedish society in certain respects, not to be a little bit generalistic.
Yeah, I mean, meetings about everything. You know?
Yeah, but what do you think? I mean, because, you know, we hear lots of things about the UN, negative things, you know, about peacekeepers doing not so good things in the countries that they go to. You know, children, you know, the UNICEF program with children disappearing, and, you know, the UN seems to be dysfunctional. And, you know, it's not dissimilar to HSBC, the bank that I work for, or actually every big corporation. You know, the experience that you described there, I would be surprised if it was different to a newly qualified graduate at someone like Linklaters or DLA Piper, or a new graduate at General Electric, or a new graduate at Google or Alibaba, or, you know, everyone goes in pure and wanting to do good, and then the system corrupts them.
Yeah, either you turn into one of them, or you leave because you don't want to be there. You know?
Exactly, and so we're two products of not wanting to be there.
Exactly.
But I guess the difference with us is perhaps that we're trying to share the truth, because everyone worships these companies. And the United Nations is currently more than ever trying to present itself as the solution for the world's problems. I was surprised to find out that the World Economic Forum, which at HSBC I had a lot to do with, and I thought it was amazing, and wow, this guy Klaus Schwab seems like a nice guy. But, you know, the World Economic Forum contractually merged with the United Nations in 2019. So suddenly, the worst of the corporate world, because HSBC, General Electric, all these people are members of the World Economic Forum, so that's the worst of the corporate world, just merged with the worst of, you know, the public sector, which is the United Nations. So now we have like...
Yeah, but, you know, they always put it in a good way, you know, like, oh, these companies are funding so much stuff, and it's, you know, they're helping out, like, we're actually having a dialogue with them, so maybe they can become better. I mean, it's always that, you know, what we talk about, or what we want people to believe, like, you know, within the system. So there's always a good story, right? Like why they are involved suddenly, or collaborating, or they're giving money to projects that are really important. So,
but of course, the United Nations is not elected. No one elects, you know, there's not a world election for the representatives.
No, exactly.
But they are determining global policy on health, on trade, on finance. It's really weird that there's this unelected global organization that controls sovereign debt, you know, and together with, you know, central banks and the Bank for International Settlements, controls our entire financial system, your credit card, my mortgage, you know, they control everything, but they're not elected, and they keep making up the rules as they go along. You know, for example, we have the World Health Assembly this week, which is effectively the parliament of the World Health Organization, meeting unelected to decide about how future pandemics will be responded to. And an unelected body, the World Health Organization, will have the authority to tell the Swedish government, which is elected, what to do. So so it basically turns our Swedish government into a puppet government because it doesn't make its own decisions. And this next week, we're going to have the same thing in the green agenda, which is something that I only discovered through my wind power sort of challenge and fight. They're going to effectively have climate change be delegated to the United Nations Environment Program, UNEP, and so that together with the ability to determine what is an emergency, they're going to be in a position to call a climate emergency and to take all the world's money and give it to the private corporations to build wind farms and wind turbines for the machines in the name of supposedly fighting climate change. But the solutions don't fix climate change. So we're in like a paradox situation. And I'm trying to figure out, how do you explain that to, you know, an 18-year-old who is going to Greta's protest? So maybe it's worth saying what's happening this week. That would be quite worth it. So one of the reasons why we're speaking today, of course, is because I wanted to tell people about the Stockholm Plus 50 meeting. And I encourage everyone to just Google Stockholm Plus 50 and see how much press coverage they can find in Aftonbladet or The Guardian or all of the big media, because they will find nothing. 3,000 people are coming to Stockholm. It's the United Nations General Assembly, which is the closest thing we have to a world parliament. And no one knows. Why is the United Nations meeting in Stockholm in secret? You know, almost. But then you know, I did my homework about it because I love to research stuff now, and I found out that there are tons of civil society organizations like Greenpeace, Friends of the Earth, who have all been colluding with the United Nations to prepare an entire program that says the world needs a green one world government. You know, and they've done fake papers and letters. It was hilarious last week. Peter Calamus, who's a very famous scientist, together with 100 scientists, basically wrote an open letter to the UN, I think it was, saying that the Sustainable Development Goals, which if anyone listening to this show has not heard about these 17 Sustainable Development Goals from the United Nations, which are a total fraud, by the way, they wrote a letter to the UN saying the Sustainable Development Goals are a fraud. And I was like, wow. But then I realized that they were just priming the pump for something to replace it. And the Stockholm Declaration, which is the One World Charter, is rumored to replace it. It's like 4 commandments, you know, thou shalt protect nature. You need to fix climate change. We need lots of money, and we need a one world government called the UN to, you know, to manage it all. And
before we move on, what's your take on the climate change
situation?
So
this is great. This is another trick. So the trick of this system is to make things super complicated to get us to fight each other. And climate change is a great example. The climate is changing. It always changes. One day it's raining, the other day it's sunny. It's always changing. But what makes the climate change is pretty complicated stuff. It's the sun, it's the moon, it's the fusion reactor that's in the middle of the earth that creates volcanoes and heat. It's about how many forests you cut down. It's about where you build your cities. It's really complicated, and that's why weather people cannot predict the weather. You know, it's very unpredictable. So I'm almost saying you need to push that to one side because everyone is just fighting each other. But do the solutions make sense? So assume that there is climate change. Do wind farms and solar farms and battery factories and lithium mines and endless power electrification, digital data centers, will that fix it? Clearly not. It's a destructive thing. So the people who are promoting those things, if they're telling me that there is a climate problem, then I know that there probably isn't. And that's the situation we're in at the moment, is we're seeing heavy industrial things telling us we need to keep doing heavy industrial things because of the climate. And if you look at some of the science, so let's say you put aside the fact that climate denier and all of these types of things, just put this stuff aside.
Yep.
And I saw a piece yesterday that was talking about temperature. And it was talking about how they used to measure the temperature in some places in the morning and in some places in the afternoon. And depending on what time of day you check your thermometer, it has an impact on what the temperature is. And it's about how you combine that information together that can make something go up or go down. And, you know, someone gave a very rational example of how that can be manipulated. And it seems that we live in a world now where numbers can be manipulated. Statistics. I don't know, maybe you drink beer, maybe you don't, but there was a great Guinness ad, and Guinness is this Irish beer with, it's beautiful looking beer. I don't necessarily like the taste. But they had a commercial which said 90% of all statistics are made up on the spot. You know, and I was like, well, that sounds like pretty good. Is that true? You know, and you know, we live in a world now where you can present whatever story you want, and
or not present one. Works
or not
too.
present it. Well, no, and you know, we look at academia. You know, people who work in universities, academics used to just be, they used to do stuff because they wanted to figure out the world, because it was amazing. Now you cannot get a grant unless there's something to sell, or your science is promoting the agenda of the funders. Yeah. And in Sweden, there's a family, they fund billions of science, you know, and they happen to love gene editing, and they happen to love heavy weapons, and they happen to love super heavy industrial stuff. So all of the stuff that they finance creates a worldview that says, oh, this stuff is all good. So again, with climate change, you look at all the money that's going into Leonardo DiCaprio, Don't Look Up, with Jennifer Gardner. Worst movie ever. I mean, but it was the most watched movie on Netflix ever. And everyone's like, wow, it's so amazing. I'm like, guys, you know, Leonardo DiCaprio, World Economic Forum, young leader, loves to, all his girlfriends are ridiculously young and malnourished. He has an island in the Caribbean. You know, is he the poster boy of, you know, saving the world, or is he a parasite? And, you know, I would argue, I have nothing against Leonardo DiCaprio. I think he's misguided. You know, he went the wrong way, and we need to bring him back. The same thing goes with Al Gore, you know, or Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton. You know, I went to university with a girl whose dad worked for the Secret Service, and she told me personal stories about, you know, so some of these people are doing bad things, and in the climate agenda, many of the people, you know, my good friend told his kids not to have children was the best way to fight climate change. I'm like, that hurt me because, you know, what if that kid has the solution if it was such a big issue? So long answer, but I'm trying to stay out of that. It's a little bit like the fight about where did the pandemic come from? Did it come from Wuhan? Did it come from someone, you know, whatever? Yeah. I'm like, it's fine, but does the solution make sense?
Yeah, exactly.
You know, giving billions to your friends' companies to make PPE, you know, masks and gowns that don't work. You know.
Can you imagine if all of that money had been invested in more hospitals, more healthcare, you know, and gone straight into the people to find solutions, you know, for their health and you know, and other solutions for COVID, right? So, and nothing of that went, you know.
And that's where I think something's not right.
Yeah, exactly.
It's the same thing with international development. You know, UNEP or UNDP, there's a lot of business out of instability in Africa or Southeast Asia. You know, you sell guns, create instability, then you send lots of development aid, and then, you know, you have like this nice virtuous circle. The problem never gets solved. It's like the healthcare industry. Yeah. They don't want you to be healthy. Healthy people aren't good business, you know, or people who are content are not good business because, you know, you need another pair of shoes. No offense on the woman thing, or a man needs another car to be happy. But, you know, they've almost created a system where they've manipulated our minds. Yuval Harari, you know, they've hacked the human mind to basically undermine very good things. And that's where I think this going back to nature, and in certain respects I'm going back to not religion, because I don't agree with religion, but spirituality.
Yeah.
About, you know, we have a higher purpose than, you know, buying Gucci handbags and drinking cheap Carlsberg beer on a Friday night. I do feel that humans have a much higher purpose than that, and we just have to remember.
We agree there. It's super important, but I also feel like it's becoming bigger and bigger. More people are waking up and seeing that there is a higher purpose. So, you know, we're heading towards the right direction. A lot of people say that, you know, we're in a phase right now where more and more of that light is coming in, you know, to kind of cleanse. And so we're here like as the pioneers to kind of, you know, push this forward and change, right? Change for the better. And
actually change is an action. So I also think we're at a crossroads where people need to be doing things. Where we are being so tempted to just live in the matrix. And, you know, when people think that doing something is posting a comment on Facebook, that's, you know, it serves a role. And I do think that social media can be used for good. And, you know, it's amazing that people can communicate. But, you know, physical, real world action is so important now. And I keep saying, someone says, oh, I'll do that tomorrow, or I'll put it off. I'm like, no, you need to do it today. And if it's planting a seed, or if it's, you know, visiting that relative or friend that you haven't seen in a long time, you need to do it, make an effort and do it today. And this is what I'm hoping people will do next week. So back to
the meeting.
The meeting. So on the 2nd and 3rd of June, and on the so it's the 31st and the 1st of June is called the People's Forum. This is like fake sort of public engagement ahead of the Stockholm meeting. And it's a bunch of things happening in Stockholm in the ABF. I'm going to be participating in part of it because I'm really interested. I want to meet people. I want to see what they're doing, you know, when you stage public engagement to pretend that the public wants what you're about to give them. That's happening on the 31st and the 1st of June. It's called the People's Forum. Then on the 2nd and the 3rd is this United Nations General Assembly Stockholm Plus 50 meeting. 50th anniversary of the Stockholm Conference of 1972, which was arguably one of the most important meetings that ever happened in the world that hardly anyone knows about. It kicked off the Rio Summit in '92. It kicked off the Sustainable Development Goals, the IPCC and climate change, a lot of really important things. And it also kicked off NGOs. And in Stockholm, Greenpeace, even David Bowie was involved. They created sort of an infrastructure to be able to influence all of us, all around the world. And all of these NGOs, which are full of people who believe that they're actually doing something good, are arguably, based on my research and my findings, were part of an agenda to shape our minds and to lead us to this Stockholm Plus 50 meeting that no one knows about. In this meeting, there will be 2,500, maybe 3,000 people, people from indigenous tribes.
Yeah, I know.
It's crazy. XR, I think, is going to be outside, and Fridays for Future, etc. And they're going to have these interventions. We need to act now. We need to take bold action. You know, they're really going to be pushing something. And on the side, there's something called the Stockholm Declaration of 2022, which someone came up with. You know, they've already been working on it, but they made it look like it's something organic that just grew out of nothing. But they've already prepared it, and they've got all these lawyers and what's his name, Fabius, and it's really interesting when you go into the names of the NGOs, the Rockefellers, Soros, the usual names of people who are not supposed to be collaborating, are all there funding these NGOs, which are saying a certain thing, which is feeding into this Stockholm meeting. Then on the 2nd and 3rd, they will have this meeting, and they will probably vote on stuff. I have a suspicion that, you know, there's been an escalation in geopolitics with the Ukraine, and now just yesterday they talked about China and Taiwan. So I have a hypothesis that there will be an event, like a serious event that's going to happen in the next week that will create urgency and an emergency maybe, so that these United Nations General Assembly, people who are already meeting, this is heads of state, super serious people, can take bold action, you know. Unelected, without consultation of the citizens of the world, they're going to take bold action and make a decision for all of us. And I mean, you already saw Antonio Guterres just 2 days ago. He's the head of the UN, and he was talking about exactly that, you know, no more talking, we need to act. It's all kind of staged. And then on the 4th of June, I've got this from one of my foreign sources, there's a super secret heads of state meeting in Sweden. Why are they meeting? Why are they meeting in secret? Why does no one know? Why is it 2 days after, the day after the Stockholm plus 50 meeting? And then it turns out that the 5th of June, so Sunday, is World Environment Day. It's a United Nations holiday. And I have a sneaking suspicion that that's the day that they will do a grand reveal announcing that the world has been saved, they've taken serious action, they're launching the Stockholm Declaration. But then when I looked into the 5th of June, it turns out that the 5th of June also happens to be Shavuot, which is a Jewish, a very important Jewish holiday. It's the day that God gave gave Moses the 10 Commandments. So really interesting to have the United Nations give the world the new commandments on the day that God gave Moses the 10 Commandments. It's also Pentecost. So Pentecost is 50 days, again 50 years, 50 days after Easter. And it's supposedly the day that the Holy Spirit came down to earth and bestowed upon the apostles and so forth effectively the start of Christianity. So it's the day that Christianity started. Celebration of. Then it turns out that the 5th of June is also the Queen of England's 75th Jubilee. Yay,
oh, wow.
The Queen Elizabeth, and all of that good stuff. And then it also turns out that it's also the 5th of June was the day that something was signed called the Berlin Declaration of 1945. And that's when Eisenhower, Stalin, Charles de Gaulle, and Churchill, I believe, met in Berlin to dissolve the German Third Reich. Completely off but all these things on the 5th of June. So it's a really strange one. And if they also launch the Green New World Order as a salvation, you know, the planet is saved. David Attenborough, you know, he's saying, you know, only technology will save us. We have the solution. And even my old colleague, so I was at HSBC Bank, and if you just Google Stuart Kirk, HSBC, he's a massive controversy. He was at a meeting in Florida, and he said that, you know, the response to climate change is BS. You know, it's completely ridiculous, and that we should be adapting because humans are great at adaptation, and we should be focusing on adapting as much as we're focusing on wind turbines. And basically, he got suspended from HSBC by Noel Quinn, my old boss and the CEO, made a big statement saying this guy, Stuart, nothing, you know, what he says has nothing to do with what the bank wants to do. HSBC wants to finance even more machines and big lithium mines and all this transition. And then a woman called Cristina Figueres, who is a super senior United Nations representative, good friends with Al Gore. She also said the same thing. And there was even some talk about likening what he was saying about climate change to Putin and the Ukrainian war. So it's very strange. But of course, you know, was that by accident? You can't give a controversial presentation like that without someone knowing. Yeah. So, you know, did he do us all a favor by just telling the truth? Or was he stoking the fire, you know, to get the emotions to say, no, the climate is so important. We need to, you know, I mean, at the World Economic Forum, Alibaba already talked about a carbon passport. Like you get a carbon account.
Exactly.
And you know, you and I, we only get 50 kilograms of carbon, and if we drive our car or eat meat, then so it's a very strange.
They want us to eat the Beyond Burger that's full of glyphosate.
Glyphosate. No, and also, you know,
glyphosate is also very destructive, you know, to the climate, and it's just like poisons everything.
Exactly.
You know? So there's like so many things we're not talking about, right? We're talking about, you know, some things that they say is, you know, the cause of it.
Yeah.
But there's so much else. I even read something about when they install all of these like 5G masts, you know, and it's all going to be through, you know, like the satellites and everything. That in itself will have a huge negative impact on nature, you know, and everything else. Why are we not talking about that?
Yeah, it's again, it's about who controls the narrative. I phoned Greve and reporters Sans Frontières, these journalistic organizations, because I've been desperate. I've been trying to find a journalist who will write about Stockholm plus 50. I mean, there's none.
Yeah.
I mean, why? Even if it was a positive thing, 50 years, United Nations, Sweden like hosting it, a huge thing, you would have Dagens Nyheter or one of the big newspapers or The Guardian. But you know, when I found out that The Guardian is owned by the Scott Trust, whose chairman is the same chairman as Schibsted, and Schibsted owns Aftonbladet and several large newspapers in Scandinavia, I realized that the entire media narrative is controlled, and The Guardian, which was my favorite, is like manipulating us the most. I mean, they manipulate us every time they say, oh, you know, support free journalism. We're a poor newspaper. And then they've got a $1.5 billion endowment and philanthropy partnerships with Rockefellers, Bill and Melinda Gates, and others. So, you know, again, how do you get just truth out and people discussing, you know, talking about it? Does it make sense that, you know, The Guardian, which people trust, and again, this is a trust thing. I want to trust again. I trust you. I trust others. So it's not that I'm without trust, but, you know, many of the things that we trust, they've been lying to us, and it really hurts. And for many people, they'd rather just ignore it than accept the fact that they've been exploited. And I want to help people be empowered again to, you know, because we deserve, it's a basic human right for people to be truthful to each other.
Yeah, but also have an open dialogue about things, right? Like when I don't see an open dialogue and they're only showing one side, that's when I know that something is off, you know, because in all other matters, you know, everyone is invited to the table, but when it comes to certain things, you know, it's just a complete stop. And we've tried to have that conversation, like, you know, everyone is open to having it. The scientists, the doctors, like the people that are, you know, on our side are all trying to have that conversation, and the other side refuses, you know. So when someone refuses and they're so, like, deliberately trying to stop a dialogue or a conversation, then to me that's like, okay, red flag immediately. Because, you know, journalism is supposed to be free for everyone, you know, and it's supposed to be freedom of speech, right?
Yeah, and also, I mean, journalism is supposed to be the joy of knowing and the joy of sharing knowledge, you know.
And making your own informed decision, right? Which to me is like almost an insult. Are they basically telling us that we are too stupid to actually make our own choices so that they can only show us, you know, what they think is right for us? I mean, that in itself, to me, it doesn't make any sense.
Well, and that's where the United Nations, this, you know, wants to control all aspects of our life. And you can see it because, you know, you see the Sustainable Development Goals being taught to kids at school. So, you know, they're already controlling our educational system. They're controlling our health system. They're controlling our financial system. Because, you know, let's not forget that the World Bank and the IMF is the United Nations. You know, you were talking about 21 UN agencies.
Yeah.
You know, the people don't actually appreciate all the things that are actually the United Nations. You know, it's everything from UNICEF to the World Trade Organization, the International Labor Organization. I
mean, you have Department of Peacekeeping Operations. I mean, the list goes on and on. There's so many, UN Women, you know, all of that stuff.
Yeah. And then they also have all of these NGOs, which are essentially the United Nations, because they're paid for by the United Nations, but they don't carry the branding.
Yeah.
And they're doing all these types of things supposedly independently, but it's with the policy and the sort of agenda of the UN.
Yeah.
And, you know, even in Sweden, the Stockholm Environment Institute, the Stockholm Resilience Center, SIPRI, the Stockholm Institute for Peace, I don't even know what SIPRI stands for. But it's, you know, these are some of the top NGOs in the world, but they are completely agenda-driven. You know, they get their money from the Swedish government. And this is also where it comes back to the interesting thing about Sweden, is to act but not to be seen. I don't know what the Latin is a motto of a family here in Sweden. And actually it's also the motto of Sweden, the government of Sweden, because the government of Sweden involves itself in so much geopolitics across the world. For a little country of 11 million, it punches way above its weight on climate. It's so strongly influencing the entire climate agenda. They give billions and billions to something called the UN Green Climate Fund, which is corrupt. So, you know, Swedish government money is going to corrupt causes. SIDA is everywhere. You know, they're funding all these NGOs, which is the International Development Agency. And then you start to look at, you know, what's happening within Sweden. You know, Sweden is almost like a social experiment. You know, what they do in the Myndigheten, you know, what they do with children, what they do in healthcare, what they do in education. You know, I was amazed that in Sweden, like community schooling or homeschooling, I don't necessarily agree in homeschooling, but I like collective community schooling, is really frowned upon. You know, the government carefully controls education. And so Sweden, for me, is really fascinating that it's also hosting this UN meeting.
Yeah.
It turns out that Kofi Annan was married to a Swede. Yeah. Tons of, you know, Sweden really influences a lot of the world.
It's been like that. But like somehow in the background, they're very like, you know, it's very carefully.
Very curated, I guess you would say, with thought and precision. Yeah. And that's something that I think people also need to wake up to.
And they're proud of it, you know, like I think we've learned, you know, that we're proud of Sweden because we do help with so many things. We do support so many, you know, humanitarian projects. We give so much money to you know, good causes. So that's kind of what we've been learning and been proud of, you know, that we're very involved.
Which is amazing because, I mean, I look at Ulf Kristersson, who is the head of the moderates in Sweden. And he was talking about how Sweden is just this unsafest country ever. You know, and the moderates ruled before the Social Democrats. So, you know, the politics are all kind of merged together these days. If it's a moderate or whatnot. I think many of the political parties are all funded by the same people. It's just who's more popular today. Oh yeah, you know, it's time for a change. Oh yes, well here's a new, you know, I mean it's even crazy to hear. And this was a story that I was told yesterday, which is about Zelensky. Zelensky is well known to be a comedian and an actor. And that, what was it, in 2014, they set up a new TV show called Servant of the People. And he played the head of state, Servant of the People. Then in 2018, they started a political party called Servant of the People, and their main candidate was Zelensky. And so they basically made a TV show reality, and it's all funded by the same guy. And you're like, wait a minute, and now everyone loves, you know, and then they won the Eurovision Song Contest. But their country is being used for like the most terrible things. You know, it's the people of Ukraine have just been, they've just been abused. I mean, what's happening to them is, but then again, how do you know what's happening? And
it's hard because there's so much information. So going back to the 50+ meeting.
Yes.
I wanted to just ask your opinion on, so, you know, my understanding is, you know, that we, of course, with these meetings, there's a lot of meetings happening in the background right now, you know, big decisions being taken, you know, yeah, it's kind of worrying to me that, you know, so many big decisions are being taken and we're being kind of asked to look that way while this is happening this way. But for this meeting, for example, like what can we do as citizens, as global citizens of this earth who want to see a change, you know, we want to have an impact and we want to have a say in what's happening and in the decision making currently. Like what would you like people to do?
So I'd like people to do 3 things. So one is I'd like them to look into the Stockholm +50 meeting and see if it doesn't look unusual to them like it does to me, to learn about what they're planning. Because if it is a global conspiracy, and it is the launch of the Green New World Order, if you see it beforehand, then you know it, right? Most people say, oh, it was a conspiracy, but they're looking backwards. But we're now saying, if this is a conspiracy, this is what they're going to do. They're going to have this big decision, the Stockholm Declaration. It's going to be the salvation of everyone. They're going to celebrate it on the 5th of June. So you will know that it is a global conspiracy and you do not comply. You do not consent. You did not vote on it. It is not what you have chosen for yourself. It's by unelected people. The second one is to go to your elected people, your representatives of your national government, and tell them to speak out on your behalf, because we do live in a democracy where we vote for people. If they speak out on your behalf, you know that your democracy is working because they're representing you and they're standing up against this unelected United Nations monster that has been created. And then third is I want people to act. And if they can come to Stockholm, there are already permitted events in Stockholm. So you can come to Stockholm, participate in real events. Greta is performing with a gangster rapper called One Cuz. I completely do not approve with what Fridays for Future and Greta are doing because it's part of the agenda. They have been chosen by the United Nations to be their fake protests. But I do not accept gangster rappers performing for school children. That's sick. And I don't blame Greta, and I don't blame her name's Isabel Axelson, who is also part of Fridays for Future. They both have, they're both autistic, and when you suffer from autism, you have some struggles. So I'm not saying that what they're doing is intentional. I'm not blaming them, but someone has created a really bad environment. So I think people should come to Stockholm and participate in these permitted protests, and you can just come to Stockholm. You don't have to be part of a protest. You're allowed to come to Stockholm and make your presence felt, because the United Nations is not our boss. They are not elected by us. We have not delegated them authority. They have no legal right over us in natural law. And the things that are, or as some people call the law, it's called the natural law. The legal system that we have is fake. It was created, by the people who use it for their own means. But to come and to say, we are humans, we are here, to do it in a really positive way. Come to Stockholm you can come from the 31st, or better yet, on the 2nd and the 3rd, and say, we want to build this world in a really positive way with love. And, I'm hoping, because you have to be very careful in Sweden, because if you're the organizer, they can put you in jail if you don't have a permit. And so I'm trying to not step into legal problems. I'm just making a suggestion that people could think about. Participate in the permitted protests and sing songs and be positive and make it known to these UN officials. The meeting is at Alpsjö. It's at the Stockholm Mason. There's nothing stopping people coming to the Stockholm Mason and politely saying to the UN officials, I did not consent to you voting on this new Green World Order. Please do not do it. Yeah. And, these are nice people. Many of these UN people, I guess, are nice people. And if they actually care about humanity, they will listen, and that they won't vote for this one world order. So that's I think people can take action. And if not, I'm going to say be prepared, if they do launch this new world order, for what comes next. Because it's going to be an interesting time where we all need to be really positive. We maybe need to find God or Jesus or spirituality again, to have a higher power that, they can't take away from us, which they're trying to do at the moment. They're trying to take everything that we hold dear, from, hugging our friends. Monkeypox. Oh, my God, monkeypox, they're now trying to say you get monkeypox from sex. So, they're taking all these holy things that are, in a way, beautiful, and undermining them. So that's what I'd say. Check it out, make sure that you're informed and that you also believe that this Stockholm plus 50 is just complete nonsense. Let your elected representatives in our democratic system, which we still have to believe in, to get them to speak up. And if they don't, you don't live in a democracy anymore. And people in the media, the press, influencers, TikTok, YouTube, whatever, to get the message out about what's happening. And then third, either take direct action by coming to Stockholm and making your voice heard at the Stockholm's Mason with the UN representatives, or they've rented out the Grand Hotel. So the UN is rented out a Scandic hotel at Stockholm's Mason, and they've rented out the Grand Hotel, which is the finest, one of the finest hotels in the world, because that's where United Nations people stay, spending people's money, and then be a really positive force for a positive change that's all about society being about contribution rather than consumption, and also that we have to have a foundation of nature. And I encourage everyone to also read 3 books. The first book is called Small is Beautiful by E.F. Schumacher, a beautiful book about how a world could work. The second one is The Hidden Life of Trees, which is by Peter Wohlleben, which gives you this, it just rekindles your fascination and wonder for the natural world. Ignore David Attenborough, Jane Goodall, you know, that book, Peter Wohlleben, without a doubt. And then the last one is a book, it's a little bit of a hard slog. It's called Regenerative Leadership. It's about how companies can be reorganized in a more natural way. And the last one, last but not least, a guy that I know and I have a lot of time for, Tony Riddle, has written a book called Be More Human. Because that's what we also need to do, is we just need to be human again and not turn into these robots that they seem to want us to become.
Yeah, those were beautiful words, and I totally agree with you that we have to go back to nature. And thank you so much for everything you're doing. Thank you so much for coming on today, and thank you for sharing your wisdom with us.
I'm always glad to try to connect with other people and do my little part in trying to help make the world a better place, or the best it can be. It's, you know, we live on a planet that is essentially Eden if we take care of it.
Yes. Absolutely. Thank you, Alexander. Thank you for coming on.
No problem.